candidate for school board must meet these requirements. They must be a citizen of the United States, they must be at least 24 years old, and they must have been a Missouri resident for at least 1 year prior to the election. They must also be resident taxpayers of the district. Being a resident means the candidate must reside in the district. Owning land or property does not qualify. Being a taxpayer means the candidate must have paid taxes to the state or to any subdivision within the immediately preceding 12 months prior to the election. Paying sales tax on a small purchase could also meet this requirement. Candidates in urban districts are required to be voters of the district rather than resident taxpayers. The urban districts are Columbia, Fort Zumwalt, Independence, Kansas City, Lee's Summit, Springfield, and St. Joseph. They cannot be delinquent on state income taxes, personal property taxes, municipal taxes, or real estate property taxes on the candidate's residence. Also, if the candidate is a past or current officer of a Missouri fee office, the fee office cannot owe the state taxes. An example of a fee office would be a license office. To prove they are current on all taxes owed, the candidate or fee office is required to file a notarized affidavit with the Missouri Department of Revenue. If the candidate is delinquent on their taxes, they may be disqualified from running if someone files a complaint with the Department of Revenue. A candidate cannot have been found guilty nor pled guilty to a felony under either Missouri or federal law. They cannot have been found guilty or pled guilty to an offense in another state that would be considered a felony in Missouri, and they cannot be registered or required to register as a sex offender. Candidates for school board are required to file a financial disclosure statement with the Missouri Ethics Commission. If the district has an operating budget of less than $1 million, they do not need to file. The disclosure statement to be filed depends on the district's policy. The candidate would file the short form if the district adopted a conflict of interest policy every 2 years. This would be MSBA Policy BBFA. The district needs to adopt the policy by the 15th of September and then mail the policy to the Missouri Ethics Commission by the 25th of September. If the district hasn't adopted the policy, then the candidate will need to file the long form. The candidate can file the form either by paper or online and must also give a copy of the completed form to the district. They must file if there were any transactions between the school district and the candidate's spouse or dependent child, or a business in which the candidate's spouse or dependent child have a substantial interest if the transaction exceeded $500. Some districts' policy may require all candidates to file, regardless of whether they have anything to report, and some districts may only require filing for those who have something to report. The candidate or the treasurer of any candidate committee must also show they have filed the required campaign disclosure reports with the Missouri Ethics Commission for all previous elections in which they were a candidate. If the candidate is elected to the board, they will need to be cautious about doing business with the district. The board member's spouse, dependent child, or a business with which they are associated cannot do business with the district if the transaction exceeds $500 or annually exceeds $5,000. There is an exception if the district bids out the transaction and the board member's bid was the lowest. There are no limits on how much can be contributed to a school board campaign, but the candidate must report how much and who gave it to them. And depending on how much they receive, they may have to form a committee. A candidate must form a committee if, when added together, the amount they received in contributions and the amount they spent on the campaign exceeds $1,000. They would also need to form a committee if any single contribution of money or donation of services exceeds $325 from any individual contributor. To form a committee, the candidate should first go to the Missouri Ethics Commission website and download the committee registration packet. Next, they will need to open a bank account that is specifically dedicated to the campaign, appoint a treasurer, and keep accurate records. Candidate committees must be formed at least 30 days prior to the election. The committee must then file certain reports with the Missouri Ethics Commission. depending on the receipts or expenditures of the campaign. The final filing date is 30 days after the election, except that candidates who take office sooner than 30 days after the election, such as school board members, must file before taking office. One of the requirements that candidates frequently violate is the paid for by rule. Any printed material used in the campaign must have a paid for by statement on it. These materials could include signs, posters, websites, flyers, newspaper, and magazine ads, as well as other things. The only exception to this rule is if the candidate creates a handmade sign and places it in their own yard or on their own vehicle. Radio and television ads are governed by federal law, and the rules are not the same as for printed material. If the printed material is paid for by the candidate's committee, then the paid for must include the name of the committee as well as the name of the committee's treasurer. For example, paid for by the committee to elect Mary Jones, David May, treasurer. If the candidate is paying for the printed material, then the paid for must include the candidate's first and last name, not just paid for by the candidate. Thank you for watching this video about the requirements for running for a board position. Please contact MSBA if you have further questions about this material.